those sort of folks. The other important thing that's happening, say around 1935, though, is that some people who were not considered white a few decades before, the Irish, the Italians, the Jews, and so forth, by now are being considered white, while others continue to be excluded. So that's what we've been kind of given as being the most significant things in town, both in terms of the buildings that have been preserved, the markers being put up, the histories that have been written. So how might we change that? That's the big question here, right? So this triumphalist narrative that celebrates the first white settlers of Melrose to the exclusion of everyone else is no longer satisfying, I think, to most people. Certainly, I have a feeling, not to the audience in this room, but for example, the Upham Family Association that runs the Upham House, they're having a bit of a problem now because the younger generations, they've told me this, don't actually care about the house, because people join that association because they're direct descendants of that family and feel this deep connection to the Yankee past, and you just don't get so many people who feel that way, particularly, of course, if with most families they have married into other ethnic groups, other racial groups, and that Yankee part of the family might just not be so important to them anymore. If we created a more race-conscious narrative, that could be more historically honest. And that would be better for all of us, really, if we were reflecting genuinely on what happened rather than just the highlights of this virtuous fantasy. It would be better for our students, honestly, and as someone who is a product mostly of the Melrose Public Schools, I can't emphasize this enough, that when I was growing up here, I was pretty much taught that New Englanders were the greatest people in the world, who saved America, who were on the front lines of abolition, who always got everything right every single time. And so it was a great shock to me to learn, that there were slaves living on the property where my elementary school was, which I'll get to in just a moment. That would be really powerful for some kid in 3rd or 4th grade to know that. And one more thing, though, any attempt to commemorate non-white history that is meaningful is going to face a lot of hurdles. I mean, it's going to take real political courage, because people will come forward, of course, who will say, you're destroying our past, right? Not by taking away anything, I'm not saying take down anything at all, but by de-emphasizing or adding to the picture of what's there. And just as an example of that, I was in Charleston, South Carolina on vacation last March. This is their monument to the 54th Regiment. Of course, we have the one across from the State House, done by Augustus St. Gaudens. This is theirs. It faces right towards where their major battle is, and it is underneath a guardrail so that you can barely see it. So, great, they got a monument, but it's beneath some rails, and everyone walks by it and no one knows it's there in this city full of Confederate monuments. I just bring this up as an example of this because with too much political compromise, that's what you could wind up getting, is something people walk by and don't see. So where are some areas that I think, I would just like to concentrate briefly on 4 different areas that I think should have representation and don't, and where could we work from there, and that's where I hope we have an interesting conversation. So the real pioneers, of course, are the Native American peoples who arrived here thousands upon thousands of years ago, and every new archaeological discovery seems to indicate it was further back than we thought in the first place. So that's just a simple chart. This is the amount of time that Europeans have been here, that little tiny fragment right there. So clearly this is something that should be recognized in the city. Now, the thing is, we actually do have a site, a very concrete site, built right into the rock in the city, that was created by Native Americans. There was a quarry here for centuries before Columbus ever arrived, where a particular stone called Melrose Green Rhyolite was harvested. And it's very well documented. It is on public land. It is near a public road. That's the map of it right there. And I have actually taken out the names of the roads, because under the rules of the State Office of Archaeology, it's not legal for me to disclose where it is in a public presentation. If you know your geography pretty well, you might be able to figure it out by looking at it. Here's the thing. I think that would be a fascinating site. By keeping it unmarked, it disguises this fascinating pre-Columbian history that we have right here in our backyard. Right, again, thinking about that school kid, they might think, oh, I have to go see Mayan ruins or the Aztecs to find real concrete Native American effect upon the land. No, it's right there in their backyard. But I've talked to the archaeologist's office, and it's a really complicated thing, because their job in that office is basically picking up the phone and discovering that some archaeological resource has been trashed or built over, or someone has come through with a metal detector and dug it up. So they are always concerned about this, and so it would have to be an arrangement with the Melrose police, that they would have to make it part of their job to go by and check that site all the time, and of course there would have to be improvements on the site, maybe a fence, and so on. I think it would be great. That's a big ask.
Can you comment on the significance of the green rhyolite?
Sure. So the green rhyolite, it is from an escarpment, right, that is hundreds of millions of years old. It was from a particular volcanic explosion that took place in what is today Lynn, many, many years ago. And so this quarry site, of course, to our eyes, used to so many different types of materials, it doesn't maybe impress us quite so much. But for native peoples, they recognized this particular color, and they made it into artifacts, into blades, tools, jewelry, that sort of thing. And it has been found all throughout this region and was traded. And every single time you get a piece, it has a particular chemical signature, and you can know it comes from that particular spot.
Maybe this is total conjecture, but do we know, like, was there a settlement there? What people who worked in the quarry?
Yeah, so there are different sites, like there's one site that's on the side of this escarpment that is the place where they quarried out the rock. And there are very clear marks that to an archaeologist's eyes are obvious, but to the layperson, no, not so much. There's another stone where clearly there are marks that someone took a hammer and was smacking around on it to make whatever it is that they were working on. Clearly there had to be people, who were staying there overnight for some period of time. Native communities tended to move on, practicing the type of agriculture they did and so on. But it's certainly a clear mark that, yes, people were living here, and perhaps for significant periods of time. It's a great site, but a lot of hurdles to that.
So can you tell us privately where it's at?
We'll talk later. One concern in all this obviously is bringing in people of color and native communities, and in this case that's actually been done. So here is Indigenous Peoples Day. That fellow there is Faris Gray, who is a leader in the Massachusetts tribe, and Heather Lavelle, who until recently was living here, actually gave him a tour of the site, and he was really excited about it as part of his heritage and would definitely be on board with that effort. But this might actually be an easier ask. This is the page for Indigenous Peoples Day Melrose. If you want to talk about that, talk to Betsy here, who would love to sign you up for the effort. This is maybe an easier ask because it actually wouldn't require any money or much money at all. All it would really need is a vote from City Council to declare that Columbus Day become Indigenous Peoples Day here in Melrose. That just requires some political bravery and a pretty deep community conversation. Until recently, we had an older person than city councilor who was willing to bring this forward. That was Manisha Butra. She is no longer there. I don't know who the current advocates would be. Do you have anyone who has said? So it can be difficult because Italians became white people in the 30s and 40s, there is, among some folks in the Italian community in particular, a sense that Columbus belongs to them. Heather Lavelle, previously mentioned, she has actually started a group called Italian Americans for Indigenous Peoples Day. So if you fall into that category, talk to her. She set up a website. She is fantastic.
Can I just add one more thing to that?
Please do, yeah.
There's legislation on the state level for this, to change Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day. We are trying to bring it through the state, and I can tell you more about it if you're interested, but the deadline is February 5th to get that out of committee, so it's really urgent, so please talk to me afterward if you're interested in endorsing it. We just need letters sent to the committee to get it out of the committee.
The second story would be that of African American slaves here in Melrose, which they were here. And again, from the perspective of a child who was in the elementary schools, this became a great surprise to me that we had slavery here in New England. Although I do seem to recall a memory of a teacher once saying this around middle school and everyone in the class being quite mystified by this. This was news. And when I talk to a lot of white New Englanders, this is news to them that there was slavery here. The best census we have from this is there was a poll tax taken in the year 1771 for everyone in Massachusetts. So about 4% of the families in what was then Malden, Melrose was a part of Malden, were slave owners. So it was not a huge part of our economic system here, although of course our entire economic system did depend upon slavery elsewhere in the colonies and then later the United States. Now you'll notice I have a picture of the Beatty School here. the school that is about to be reopened. And that's the school I went to when I was a kid, and I mentioned that there was slavery on that spot, and indeed there was. So if you're familiar with that site, you know that on the left there's a parking lot. On the other side of the parking lot, there's a very pretty white house, the second Phineas Sprague house, built in 1798. There was a house on that spot before that house, and in that house lived Phineas Sprague, naturally, but also his enslaved man, Pompey. And this is a story that is actually a text that you're seeing here that was taken from Goss's History of Melrose, and I'll just read it. The following anecdote is told concerning one of his, meaning Phineas Sprague's, slaves. He, Phineas, owned a number of Negroes, and had the credulous darkies believe that he could find out by arithmetic any mischief they had been up to. So when a neighbor made a complaint that he had reason to believe a certain Negro had stolen a cart chain, he called the Negro up and told him he suspected he had been doing wrong, and unless he owned up, he would figure it out.